Hi, I am Helen Thomas, and welcome to the CDFM study group. I am the facilitator for the group, and I am here to assist you in making sense or breaking down to get a better understanding of the material for those of you who are studying to, to take the test for your Certified Defense Financial Management examinations. I will be utilizing the 2013 version of the study guide, and we will start with Module 1.1, which is the Government Resource Management Environment. Let us turn to page 1.1.5, and we're going to look at the federal legislative process. And that's just some basic history information, some things you would have learned probably middle school, high school, about the Declaration of Independence all the way to the Constitution. Because the Constitution is the basis for the development of our budget process today. I would not necessarily say to memorize the dates for when the Declaration of Independence occurred, when the Articles of Confederation occurred, but ensure that you know the order in which they occur, so that if that list is then jumbled, mixed up, you are able to then put them back in order. For instance, as it mentioned at the bottom of page 5, that the Articles of Confederation is a precursor to the Constitution. That simply means it comes before the Constitution. But the first thing that happened was the Declaration of Independence. So the end result of the Constitution was a separation of powers. We want to ensure that no one entity or individual had enough power where we would have a monolithic type of government where one person is in charge of everything. So we have the three branches of government that was developed way back when. So the order in which you should learn them is legislative, executive, and judicial branch. The order is important because as you turn over, let's say to page 8, let's go to page 1.1.8, you will see we start talking about portions of the Constitution as they apply to the branches of government. So if you learn legislative, executive, judicial, well, you've also just learned Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 of the Constitution. Some important things to see on page 8 and 9 of the legislative process, the legislative branch, if Article 1, so Section 1 talks about the two parts of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Section 2 talks about the House of Representatives serving 2-year terms versus Section 3, which talks about the Senate serving 6-year terms. Also within the Senate, you will see that there are 2 senators for each state. And additionally, the Vice President of the United States is also the President of the Senate. He does not have a voting, he typically does not vote. However, if they're equally divided in the Congress, then the Vice President can vote to make the difference in the Senate. Section 7 talks about raising revenues. Section 8, raising taxes. And Section 9 is very important to us as budget analysts, financial managers, because Section 9 of the law says that no money shall come out of the Treasury. Treasury is where our nation's bank is, unless we have an appropriation law. So it's essential we can't get any money to function unless Congress appropriates the money. So that's why that's important. So Article 1, Congress can raise taxes, borrow money, regulate commerce, conscript forces, declare war, raise and support armies. Whereas, remember that legislative and Congress is the same thing. Additionally, on page 10, Article 2 of the Constitution governs what the executive branch is allowed to do commonly known as the president. So as you see stated there, the executive powers of the president to be the commander-in-chief and execute the laws. So we know under page 10 that the president serves 4-year term, and the president can also provide Congress with recommendation for laws in the State of the Union address that he typically does. And so Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, that's the president. So based on Article 2 of the Constitution, those are functions of the president. Article 3 then looks at judicial branch, which is the third branch of government. Remember, separation of powers. So the judicial branch is responsible for interpreting the laws, and that includes our Supreme Courts and other inferior courts. Now let's look at the legislative process. How does that process work for a bill to become a law? So there are 4 types of legislative proposals. There's a regular bill, a joint resolution, concurrent resolution, or simple resolution. A bill is just a general proposal. We want a law to do X, Y, and Z. That's the general proposal. The joint resolution can be originated either in the House or the Senate. That's a law that they want to change. And a joint resolution may be used, let's say, if we want to change a portion of a law that's already there and we want to challenge that law. That can be done by Congress through the joint resolution process. The key to understand for the bill or the joint resolution to be effective, they must be signed by the president so they can become law. The other 2 types of legislation proposals are concurrent and simple. Concurrent meaning that it happens both in the House and the Senate. That same action happens both in the House and the Senate. Or simple meaning an action that occurs either in the House or either in the Senate, either or. But the key with the concurrent and the simple resolution is neither of those have to go to the president, because those aren't necessarily laws. Those are agreements or baselines that are established by the House and the Senate as ground rules for them to evaluate. Now, there are 3 ways in which the legislation, these bills can come to the floor. Either through the president, and we said it through his State of the Union address, either by a member or by a committee, because the Congress is broken down into committees based on specific needs and specific purposes. Now let's move on to page 14 as we look at how a bill becomes a law. And you can always Google that Schoolhouse Rock. It's actually a cartoon video that most of us used to watch as children, but it clearly explains this whole process of how the bill comes to the floor. It goes from the House of Representatives, they vote on it, then it goes to the Senate, then they vote on it in the likely form, and then when they disagree, they come together. So on page 15, where it says resolving differences, so the House and the Senate reviews the bill in identical form. And then at some point, they have to come together to resolve any differences that they have in why they agree or disagree with a particular input in that bill. Whenever they come together, as stated on page 15, it may be called the third chamber, because you got the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then oftentimes the conference committee. And anytime you hear the word conference, that means both the House and the Senate are coming together to resolve differences. Because remember, only one document can go to the president for the president to sign. So they have to determine what that final document is going to look like. And then on page 16, you see the final step is after that bill is agreed upon in both the House and the Senate, it's issued in identical form and it is enrolled. It gets added into that process to go to the president for the president to sign or to send back. And finally, the bill, then once the bill comes to the president for the president to sign, then the president has 4 options. Option 1 says approval and signature. That means the president gets the bill, he agrees with it, he signs it, the bill becomes law. But there are a couple of instances where the second one says does not sign but allows the bill to become law. So there are instances where the president can get it, don't sign it, but it still becomes law. So there are key things to remember here. The number one thing is Congress must be in session. So they're in session. They send the bill to the president for the president to review. The president then has 10 days to sign or reject that bill. If Congress is in session, the president does not sign that bill within 10 days, that bill automatically becomes law. The opposite of that is the pocket veto. The pocket veto scenario comes if Congress is adjourned. That means Congress is not in session. The president receives the bill, does not sign it within 10 days, that bill does not become law. That's a pocket veto. So Congress is not in session with the pocket veto. And then a traditional veto is the president gets the bill, he disagrees with it, and he sends it back to the House of Origin. And he says, okay, relook. But remember, according to law, if 2/3 of Congress can agree, they can override the president's veto. So that's a stipulation that's placed in our laws that says 2/3 of Congress can override the president's veto. So those are the federal legislative process as we walk through and understand the 3 branches of government, the Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, which governs legislative or Congress, executive or president, and your judicial, which is your Supreme Court or your inferior court. Next, we're going to look at the federal budget process and kind of see on the budget side, things work a little bit differently.